Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our third of 5 programs on Compassion 2.0 and the urgent imperative for all of us to deepen our awareness of what compassion and love and tender loving care and all the higher virtues mean, and how we can inculcate them in our lives. Over the last several days, as we all know from the news, there's been a conspicuous lack of compassion emanating out of the Middle East. And I want to deepen our exploration of that, both to keep people informed, as we always do on Humanity Rising, but also to underscore the urgency of the discussion that we're having this week about compassion. It started on Saturday, October 7th, as Hamas out of Gaza initiated a shocking attack against Israel, really of the magnitude of what the United States experienced on 9/11, where almost literally out of the blue came the airplanes taken over by some of the mujahideen and flew into the 2 World Trade Towers and also the Pentagon down in Washington. In an act that really both shocked the world and reoriented the geostrategic alignments and led to the carnage in Afghanistan and Iraq, the imprisonment in Guantanamo, the torture in which the United States engaged in Iraq, as we all saw from Abu Ghraib, etc. Israel has already begun striking back, and already the number of civilians killed by the Israelis far exceeds the number of civilians killed by Hamas. And we have a situation where the tragedy unfolds in almost an orgy of hatred. And it's a peculiar thing when you see the victim become the victimizer and the oppressed become the oppressor at the same measure that they suffered in the first place. It's a truly mysterious phenomenon and has to do with the intricacies of hate. And I want to explore that for just a few moments. I happen to be providing lectures on Eric Hoffer's extraordinary book called The True Believer. And I want to just read a couple of passages from his treatment of what it takes to do what Hamas and the Israelis are doing to each other. It's really, as you think about it, it's actually quite puzzling. And I want to just read from Hoffer because his language is so clear. But it is very important that we contemplate these matters as we're watching the news. He says, it is startling to see how the oppressed almost invariably shape themselves in the image of their hated oppressors. That the evil men do lives after them is partly due to the fact that those who have reason to hate the evil most shape themselves after it and thus perpetuate it. What Hamas did to Israel and what Israel has done to now Gaza is what the Jews suffered for 2,000 years at the hands of Europeans and Christians, culminating in the Holocaust in the Second World War. And then what have they done? They went to the Middle East and have been doing the same thing to the Palestinians, oppressing the Palestinians. Gaza is the largest concentration camp ever built. It's 5 miles by 20 miles. Almost everybody in Gaza originally were refugees that had been expelled by the Israelis as they established the state of Israel in 1948. 50% of the population of Gaza are under 20 years old. And they've never lived or experienced the world outside of what has been called the largest open air prison on earth. And so you have a situation in which the oppressed become the oppressors. So Hamas is a voice, an action from the Gazan, the Palestinians who are so deeply oppressed, and then they take on the very things that they've been oppressed by and do it to the oppressor. And the cycle of hate goes on and on, unrelentingly. But Hoffer makes 2 points that I want us to just think about. He says, though this hatred is a very convenient instrument for revenge and the mobilization of unity among the population and the mobilization for defense, it does not come cheap. We pay for it by losing all or many of the very values we have set out to defend. So we talk about liberty, we talk about freedom, we talk about human dignity, we talk about the civilized way of life, and yet we perpetuate the very antithesis of these things onto the people we hate, and thereby erode those very virtues that we think we're using violence to defend. Extraordinary when you watch what's happening within this light. But he makes a second point, which is also very profound. He says, and there is also this: when we engage in hatred, when the oppressed becomes the oppressor, we rid ourselves of personal responsibility. There is no telling to what extremes of cruelty and ruthlessness a person will go when they are freed from the fears, hesitations, doubts, and the vague stirrings of decency that go with individual judgment and moral virtue. And he points out that there is something in the exercise of hate that disengages us from the very virtues and moral ethics that keep us from engaging in violence and destructiveness. So when those moorings are taken away, we express our hatred in ways that are inhumane at levels that defy imagination. And the cycle, he says, continues. And he cites Dostoevsky, who talked about the right to dishonor, that when we get caught up in the self-righteousness justifying our hatred, we engage in the virtue of dishonor, and we do unto others those very things that erode the very basis of morality in a civilized world. And so the tragedy of the oppressed becoming the oppressor, the cycle of hatred that we are seeing on live TV right now is something that is not, he says, just because the leaders are doing it. He says, when this happens, you can't just blame the leaders. It is an infection in the collective psyche of the population as a whole. And it is something in which we all participate. So I want to raise this because as we see the retribution of Israel now on Gaza, monitor your thoughts, monitor your feelings, and hopefully understand more deeply the extraordinary logic and compelling momentum of hatred and how important it is, as we're now going to discuss, to develop those aspects of our common humanity that can lead us to the kind of compassion that can break through the Gordian knot of hatred. And that's what Humanity Rising stands for. And that's why our name is Humanity Rising. How do we free ourselves of those very instinctual drives that lead us into our base emotions through the elevation of our consciousness? And that's our subject today, Compassion 2.0. So it's in this spirit, I want to welcome all of you to Humanity Rising and welcome my good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who is with Carson convening this session. Tom, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and thank you for your very potent and powerful opening comments. It's a perfect setup for the conversation we want to have today. Monday, we talked about Compassion 2.0, why it's needed more than ever. Yesterday, we talked about compassion, politics, and the common good. And now today, we want to take a deeper conversation into how do we architect compassionate human experiences, whether it be in some of the technology that's available in the marketplace or in the workplaces where we live, or more broadly in society. And fortunately, both behavioral and neuroscience research is getting more and more integrated with the wisdom and spiritual traditions and being brought into the mindset, the thinking. And it's fortunately helping us remember that as a species, we're hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. Compassion is part of who we are as a species. Doesn't mean that competition isn't part of who we are, but we fortunately are hardwired for much of what we're talking about. And so I'm excited for today's conversation. Welcome again, Carson. Great collaborating with you this week on the programming.
Yeah, hi Tom. Thank you. It's been great. I've just been very, very pleased and excited about what we've seen and what's moving ahead. I would agree so much with Jim about what he mentioned around as a humanity rising, right? In the sense of how do we move past some of this innate, parts of our brain, so to speak, that evolved earlier than later parts, et cetera, and yet still, of course, control and put so much of us through so much suffering and change and difficulty. And to your point, we are wired to be pro-social, and this is what Compassion 2.0 as a group of which we're a group of professionals. You can check us out at compassion2.com and learn more about what we're up to. But the bottom line is that we have to lean into our pro-social nature. And as you said, that has been validated by science, continues to unfold. And it for us, our mission is to bring that into a frame where people can embrace that, and it can be scaled all throughout various parts of our lives in ways that we haven't yet had an opportunity to think about, right? So historically, compassion has been a virtue taught in a non-secular frame. And now what we're seeing is an additional elements to that of compassion as a secular activity validated by science and ultimately brought hopefully into scale into our culture, our lives, our products, all kinds of different places. So anyway, that's our frame. And today I'm very excited too to talk to three really of the pioneers in this in their own right in bringing compassionate products to people as well as compassionate organizations. So with that, I think what we'll do is we'll first start with our two live guests. So I'll welcome both Jenova Chen as well as Jay Vidyarthi into our conversations. Hi, gentlemen. It's great to see you. Thank you for taking the time. Just a quick overview from me, and then I'd like to turn it over. We'll first start with Jenova. Both of these gentlemen have been, like I mentioned, pioneers in their own right. Jenova has been working in the space of, and these are, hopefully I'm going to represent them correctly. And if I don't, Jenova and Jay, please, let the audience know where I've gone off the rails. But Jenova has been doing compassionate-based games for, I think, 10 plus years, if not longer. He's done just tremendous work.
17 years.
17
if
years.
you count the time before we started the company, probably 19 years.
Wow. So tremendous, just tremendous. So he's a game developer and he's been thinking about these things for a very, very long time. Jay Vidyarthi joins us as the founder of Still Ape. Jay is also a practitioner and a teacher, and he has many hats even though he has not much hair. So anyway, he's brilliant, and he's founded the first design studio that focuses entirely on mindfulness and meditation and compassionate products and projects. So again, two people who've been cutting the ground, so to speak, with thinking about compassion and mindfulness in different ways. So again, it's such an honor to have both of you here. So turning our attention to Jenova. Jenova, let's pick up just where you started there 19 years ago. Tell us, just relatively briefly, your journey, no pun, which is the name of a game that he has, but what has been your path? What made you make these choices and build these wonderful games?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will make the story short. I think we all grow up with something that we care and we love, as a child. And when I grew up in my generation, video game is a thing that, almost all boys, at least, maybe not the girls, but all boys play. And I grew up with quite a lot of health issues. So a lot of times I wouldn't be able to attend PE classes, and I have to stay in the classroom where all the kids are out there. So I'm kind of a loner, and I have many time to, just spend time with my own thoughts as a child. And video game become one of the companions I have. Right? I learned many things. I experienced many stories, just like books in the games. I cried, I laughed. I also made friends who loves games. And so to me, game is like a friend. However, it's also a very misunderstood friend. Almost all parents think video games is equivalent as gambling. It's all they think it's drugs because it's so addictive. When I grew up, I never thought games is going to be, my career, because everybody despises such a medium. But then when I was in the graduate school at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, I was studying film. I was hoping to become a movie director working for Pixar. That's my dream when I first arrived America. But the school was pushing us to study how we could tell stories using the latest technologies. And interactive media was what the school is pushing for. At the time, we see interactive media as a website that's interactive, application that's interactive, and a theme park that you don't just go there, sit and watch. You would be interact with roller coaster rides and people. And as I was studying, in the film school, I started to realize a surprising overlap between the beginning of cinema and the beginning of video games. Almost, my friend has a saying. He said that anything you grew up that your parents hate and think is a trash will become national treasure when you grow up. I think that already happened to the Marvel comics. When comics first came, I remember people say it's filled with violence and sexuality and anger, right? But today it's almost a modern myth. When poetry first was introduced, the society was not ready for it. They think it makes people emotional, and it's dangerous and has violent potentials. And my love towards games, and it makes me want to share this love with more people. And as I study the film industry, I started to realize game industry is going to repeat what film industry going through. And the very first 40 years of film industry, they were trying to mimic traditional mediums. They were trying to repeat what the theatrics and what dancing or sports on the stage, and they just put the camera there. They just shoot that, right? It takes them 40 years to realize how to move the camera, how to cut through times with editing to tell new stories. And the film industry grew from what is initially a kind of a technological bubble to capture reality, like a VR, this is today, to a medium where people of all ages could find content that they can relate to. But it took a long time. And realizing that pattern, I wanted to see game grow up. I want to see game become a respectful medium of art, because I loved games. So I want to see game to be as good as they can. I want to see games be respected by other people, just like how we respect art, poetry, music, movie. And it's that love I have towards game that made me think about what can I do, to help to speed up this process. And while I was at school, USC has a game innovation grant. I arrived in America in 2003. That was, a few months away from the Columbine shooting. I don't know if you guys still remember that. Basically, a couple of teenagers just raided the school. They put up a fence and they have grenades and machine guns, killed many people. And the Congress blamed this on video games. They say because the kids like to play video games and there are shootings in the video games, that is why the violence happens in today. So the school asked us to make a game that is the opposite of what the Congress has said is bad example of video games. And I, at the time, I was thinking about the most popular game is Grand Theft Auto. So can we make a game that's the opposite, of Grand Theft Auto? It is, it's violent, it's stressful, it's addicting, and I wanted to see, can the interactive media produce something that is not destructive but healing? That's not addicting, but make you think about life and, kind of contemplative and meditating. Instead of getting you addicted on the coins and scores, we just tell you a story and make you emotional. And so we made a game called Cloud while we were in school, just experimenting that. And to my surprise, you know, when we made a video game, you look at it every day, you don't feel anything, you're super desensitized. But when the game came out, we had so many people downloading the game that our school website actually crashed. And we had to move our game onto a commercial website hosted by Electronic Arts. What happened is a lot of people who played this game cried for the first time. They never thought video game would make them cry. And they sent us letters to say, you know, how, you know, this game made them emotional, and, you know, they start to think about games that, you know, is not necessarily just competition and violence. And they want to see this type of game turn into commercial games. So people around the world would realize, you know, video game has the potential of art, and video game could potentially make your life better rather than be a big distraction. With all the letter coming around the world, and one of the letter made me really kind of like raise my eyebrows, which is that they say, hey, please tell everybody who's involved in this video game, you know, you guys are beautiful people. I grew up, nobody ever in my family would tell me I'm a beautiful person, not even my wife, my kids, they want to think I'm a beautiful person. But somehow by making a game that evoke a positive emotions, that some people somewhere, they felt a beauty from the action. And that really struck me. And that makes myself and the other students who's involved on the project, we say, well, why don't we? You know, if people around the world tell us we should, then maybe that's the God's calling. So we started talk to all the publishers, showing them this game we made, and, you know, with all the luck and timing, we founded our company in 2006. And that's how we started. You know, every game we make, that it become commercial and it reaches to more people, and more people come back to write letters to encourage us, you know, and tell us how our game changed their life. And we're basically getting to that loop of trying to help people and hearing inspirations and encouragement from people. And yeah, it's 17 years already.
Well, thank you for sharing. First off, I speak for myself, but I'm sure others on this call and other places think of you as an incredibly beautiful person. So we'll just start with that. So, you know, it's interesting to think about, to me, as you're speaking, I so much appreciate hearing your history, particularly as a film student. It's ironic, actually, because I went to USC too to be a film student, but then wound up studying Eastern philosophy, but we can talk about that another time. But what's fascinating is this idea that the film and radio and books and so forth are these architected experiences and expression of people's humanness and human experience on the planet. But yet it's not, of course, interactive, right? It's a consumption basis. I look, I read, I listen, whatever it might be. I watch maybe theater on stage, etc. But it's this expression of that's only one directional at one level. I mean, of course, the actors and so forth are feeling, and you can feel their feelings, etc. But I never understood this. But games, because of the technology, is the first architected interactive human experience, in a sense where there's an architecture behind it where people are being guided, in a sense, through a process. And I know obviously that's probably very obvious, but I just didn't understand the profundity of that, in the sense of it being an interactive architected human experience by one person holding and directing another, to the point where in your initial experience with Cloud, and I know subsequently with all the other games you've made, that people have been emotionally moved as a result. That's phenomenal. I mean, that's very interesting. I'm curious too about that. I know we were talking earlier that some of your most recent game that you've had success with is something like 11 million or 18 million people monthly. What was the number?
Yeah, it's 18 million people monthly and 260 million historical. Yeah,
That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people to be doing that monthly, and to have this active, curated experience and environment that you and the team, of course, have architected for people and continue. I can only imagine, some of the topics and so forth that come up. But again, we'll get to this. But I would like to get back just to the moment when you think about the games that you're building, and you're thinking about these architected experiences that you're creating for people. How to say this? You've spoken to some of your motivations, but can you go a little deeper in that, in the sense of what are you trying to achieve with the human experiences that you're architecting for? I know, for instance, is one of the principles that I know you've considered. I know tend and befriend, as opposed to killing and destruction, is a critical game dynamic. So could you just unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. I just started the story. Like the fundamental drive of myself and the company was from the desire I heard from the player, and also I can concur with them, is we wish games can be more respected. Right. And in order to gain respect, then we have to make games that is respectful to the player, to the audience. Right. And only if we respect them, then hopefully they could respect back. And so when it comes to design games, we are thinking about how could we be respectful towards our players' time, towards their experience. And so initially we're building these single player games, which is kind of like a roller coaster ride. You sit in a game and we let you go through an experience. And we were thinking, how can we earn respect from our audience? And it's actually very similar to music and movies. We want to blow their mind, not like physically, but emotionally, to bring them a kind of eye-opening, cathartic, climax, so that they start to look at the world in a different perspective. That's usually how you describe a great piece of art. Like if you go to see a popcorn movie and you come out of the theater, you joke with your friends who just see the movie, and you talk about a particular part about the film. You say, oh, which performance do you like? However, if you watched an amazing movie, a masterpiece, when you leave the theater, everybody's quiet. Their expectation has been completely shattered with the experience, and that their mind is thinking about what they just saw, why they feel that way, what was the thing that happened in the story that made them feel this new way they've never felt before. And that was what I think is the best thing we could deliver. And so for the first few games we made, it was all we think about. Compassion at that point is just between the creators and the audience, the authors and the audience. However, as we start making games that involves multiple people in the video game, as we start to think about the potential interaction that will happen between the audience, that doesn't happen in theater. I mean, there's, you're locked to your seat, and that's all you do for 2 hours, and then lights on, everybody gets out, right? But in the interactive media, the other person can do quite a lot of things. They're very free. In most of the video games, they do things that's fun and naughty. Naughty things are fun with lots of feedback. And so a video game was notorious to be seen as toxic because of the competitive natures, toxic between human beings, between audience. And so we start to worry about, is that going to earn the respect? If you get online, you get in the game, and a teenager hops online and just yell at you and call you stupid, and that's what the gaming was like back in 2012 when we started making the online games. And at that point, we started to realize that in order for this medium to be respected, we have to focus on how can we create a positive, compassionate interactions between human beings, between the audience inside this interactive experience. And that's where we really started to think about how can we evoke a sense of compassion among humans in the virtual experience. It was not an easy journey. For quite many times, I almost lost faith in the human nature or humanity. You know, I thought we were born to care and love and help each other, but most of the time in the virtual world, our morals, our, you know, the good and bad we learn growing up in reality does not get carried into a virtual space, because in that virtual space, you're a mouse or you're a tank. Your moral standard gets reset. And everybody become giant babies. In fact, I think this happens with internet browsers. You know, when you become an anonymous presence with just an alias in the comments section on the forum, your behavior is very different than what your behavior is in real life. So then we have to actually reshape the moral values in the virtual world, and that has become a decade-long learning and testing process to see what makes human compassionate.
Oh, very tremendous. Thank you, Jenova. So I want to pause here because I'd like to bring Jay into the conversation. Jay, could you too just give us a brief background on how you've arrived to a place where, as a practitioner, as a designer and so forth, where you are sitting at this nexus really of a lot of entrepreneurial activities in product development around mindfulness, meditation, compassion, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. Like Jenova, I'll start at childhood because I think first principles are useful. So my upbringing, I also was a gamer and I played a lot of games, a lot of the ones that we might describe as toxic. I remember as a teenager, 10, 11-hour days of Counter-Strike or Descent till my parents were like, your eyes are red. And I was like, really? But as I got older, there were some other things that were in my childhood. So I had someone in my immediate family with severe mental health issues. My parents immigrated from India to Canada, and there was a lot of drive towards excellence and success, as I think people in similar situations can probably attest to, a similar values shift when someone comes from these countries. And there was also an element of curiosity about psychology that arose. And I think combined with being exposed to things like meditation at a young age, I wasn't meditating like we talked about. I saw my parents meditating, so I immediately thought it was lame and a waste of time because that's what we do when we see our parents do something. But I was exposed to it, so it certainly wasn't a weird thing. It was almost the cultural family element of my life. When I took that need for excellence and my interest in psychology into the professional world, my first professional job as a designer, I was consulting. So I was doing design work for whoever would pay. And I loved the process. I learned a lot of amazing skills. But after 4 or 5 years, I felt really profoundly lost and it felt meaningless. And I didn't know why it mattered that I would just create this website to help some insurance company sell more insurance. And I remember this one moment I had a founder of a company, he opened a project with, he's like, the goal of this project is to make me rich. And it was like a joke. But I remember sitting there being like, that is not a joke. That is actually what the goal is. And I felt so hollow and empty. And I got offered a promotion at this job. And I was very curious, and I didn't have the word compassion at the time, but I was very curious. I was starting to explore mindfulness practices in my personal life. And I was like, some of these projects are just draining me. But there was a glimmer of something. There was 2 projects I did, one for the United Nations and one for a local health authority, where I really felt energized because I was like, this work is contributing to something that I want to see in the world. And so I declined that promotion and went to graduate school. So I was 5 years into a career to my parents' chagrin, threw away a lot of money to go spend money on graduate school. But I started to work specifically on this growing curiosity about mindfulness practice and mental health and well-being. And I proposed this project, which was a technology for mindfulness. And this was before the apps were regular and that sort of thing. And people looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, you can't, technology and mindfulness are the opposites. Jenova, I don't know where you were then, but I needed you in the room to be like, they don't have to be opposites. But actually, I didn't say this to Jenova last time we got to meet and prep for this, but around this time I did play Journey, and it was a profound experience for me. And so I'm really grateful to you, Jenova, for creating that game with you and the team, because at this time I had abandoned my pursuit of video games because I had acknowledged that they were the complete opposite of who I wanted to be in the world. And Journey really helped me see the power of design, that it wasn't games that were toxic, it was the values and intentions that were being put into the games and the ones that were sort of going viral. And so that was a big inspiration. So thank you, Jenova, for that. Anyway, I created, yeah, this is so great. So I created a project there called Sonic Cradle, which was, I just assumed I was going to create and then go back to my day job. But to my surprise, I got a lot of global exhibitions and speaking engagements and academic publications in journals about human-computer interaction. People were interested in technologies for mindfulness. It was grounded in the neuroscience of mindfulness, and it was a digital interaction designed to create a loop, an attentional loop consistent with mindfulness practice, and the outcomes were really interesting. And so I was like, this actually might be possible. And so I left academia and joined a startup called Interaxon that were working on a headband, which is a consumer-grade EEG headband called Muse. And I was charged with the job as the first sort of product design hire at this growing startup to try to create a product experience for meditation for this. So I took my academic work, I brought it and created this product called Muse, the brain sensing headband. And I think at this point, there have been 30 million meditations that have been conducted with Muse, the brain sensing headband. And, I remember the moment when I walked into Best Buy and saw it on the store shelves, and it was kind of mind blowing to me, the change that's possible, because this is a store that people come in to buy a flat screen TV. And right here on the shelf beside the Fitbits is a consumer grade electroencephalographic headband with a paired app designed to help someone self-administer neurofeedback while practicing mindfulness meditation and measure their brain state on the shelf of Best Buy. But the real transformative factor for me as a designer was when we started to get all these 5-star reviews. And I learned something really essential about the role of creating technology, because the 5-star review of Muse wasn't the same as the 5-star review of like the Amazon app. Right? The Amazon app, or I'm just picking on Amazon, but any app, it's like, oh, I can buy stuff. It's easy to use. The 5-star reviews of Muse were like, I find myself more able to be a better mother, or I am more present for my kids, or I've been struggling with anxiety or depression, and this has really helped. And I was like, there is something in the quantification of these 5-star reviews that's being missed. And that's the quality of experience that technology can generate. And if Jenova can make a game system and have millions of people enact acts of compassion, why can't the systems of our society be designed in a way to create acts of compassion? Why can't our apps and our technologies? And, I loved Jim's share about the Gaza Strip, and it's so real that what's happening over there and these base emotions taking over. But from a product design perspective, media has a big role. And I loved what Jim said about when you're watching the media to monitor your thoughts. And I would even add to monitor the media itself and the way it's designed and how it generates polarization and isolation and echo chambers and outrage. And so anyway, my fire was lit to create more technologies and try to pursue this. And so long story short, since then, I've created a design consultancy called Still Ape. And we've worked on over 40 projects, everything from more mindfulness stuff to compassionate social media, to games that are FDA approved to help with ADHD, exploring the medicinal use of psychedelics by clinical therapists, and many, many more. And I've got to meet all these founders who are pushing the envelope like Jenova, pushing the envelope of what's possible with technology. Underlying all of this, I think there's an understanding that's growing that technology is not the enemy, right? When you design an experience, you're basically choreographing attention. And as someone shared in the chat, where we put our attention is where we put the energy of society. And so if we can choreograph our attention to better things, I really do sincerely believe, and I've seen firsthand, that it is possible to create technologies that generate transformative change in our lives, in our families, in our communities, in our companies, in our organizations, in our countries, and on Earth. And I think what's really important to understand is that that is possible, and that we've seen it in small scale. And really the task that lies ahead of us is not to invent something completely new, but to find out how do we scale what we know is possible. And so it's been an amazing journey. I'm super grateful to be here with all of you and have a chance to share what I've learned, and happy to connect with anyone or share any other insights that I might have learned on the way. So thanks, Carson. Thanks, Jenova.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. We appreciate it. And you too, I feel, also another very beautiful person.
Even though I don't have the hair, I need my hat.
Well, the hair is what makes is and the lack of it is an additive thing. We are bumping up against time, which is unfortunate, because I feel like now we're ready to get into the meat of everything. I would say to your point, Jay, about the technology, I think in and of itself, just like anything that exists, in and of itself, it's not necessarily good or evil in terms of tech. It's a question of how it's used, and because it's an expression of humanity in a sense as well, right? I mean, of course, we are the ones that have originated whatever technologies that we're working with. So I think what's, to your point, is that this notion of having tech now allows us to now fabricate human experience. It allows us to do it in a way that, of course, could be done like we were discussing before around, cultural expression or artistic expression, et cetera. That's a human experience by all means. But the notion of using a technology now in a deeper and an ongoing directed fashion to I'm not articulating myself very well here, but to do something in a different way than what has existed up from just paper, for instance, or musical notes, et cetera, just being played through a machine.
Yeah.
Wow. So I guess the real question becomes is, what are the principles ultimately are behind the design of these things, right? So I know, we just have a couple of minutes really to speak to this, but Jenova, just and I know you've spoken this about having games be respectful and having them not be naughty. Those are my words, not yours, but just the notion of what are the explicit design principles that you think about when you're building these experiences for human beings? What are you trying to achieve? Like awe, as an example. From what I understand, the notion of awe is a design principle in your game. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we first was attempting to make two kids who play games love each other rather than trying to beat each other or shoot each other's head and humiliate each other, that's what usually happens in a competition, is that we tried all kinds of environments, like I'm sure you guys have heard of the Stanford prison experiment. And what's some people argue about the scientific quality behind the experiment, but what I really find interesting is that if you change the environment and if you give people a certain role and power, they would change, their moral value would change. I mean, everybody at this point, I think, believe absolute power corrupt, absolutely. If you would give someone that extreme power, they will focus on, first use that power, and second, probably acquire more power. And so when we put two video game players in a game because they have a gun, they will first think about how I'm gonna use my gun. Even though you can talk to each other, right? The first thing is, can I shoot you and headshot you, right? Or what if I don't kill, I shoot your foot and see what happens, right? Like, this, in a movie, if you see there's a gun on the table, you know what's going to happen next. That's how the power dynamics happens. And so we were looking for like, how can we change this environment where people actually want to connect with each other and people want to help each other. And so then we realized that the only way to make that environment happen is by making the people feel small and vulnerable. I mean, we human beings grew up, in the wild. We have to help each other to survive in a harsh nature. We are afraid of the unknown, right? We are very weak against most of the things in nature. But only when we connect and help each other, we can survive. So that is an instinct that we all have as in our biology. So just to stimulate this instinct, we have to make people either feel very small against the environment, feel a sense of mystery and not understanding the universe, right? Not understanding the surroundings, that makes them feel vulnerable. Once they are vulnerable, they become much more open to each other. I mean, sometimes we say, like, what is a genuine human connections, right? They say when people opens up their vulnerability to each other, then they feel they are heard, they are understood, they are appreciated, and they feel better about themselves and about the world around them. So the vulnerability, to me, is the core of compassion. If you're all tough and strong, like Batman or Superman, like, it's gonna be very hard to have any compassion, and the way, even in those comics, that makes us like these heroes is because they have a weakness, and they have a vulnerable moment. So vulnerability to me is a key.
Thank you. That's amazing. Jay, to you.
Yeah, I can add to that unless you have another question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think when I started this work, I was thinking a lot about mindfulness because it transformed my life. And so when I worked on Sonic Cradle and when I worked on Muse, I was really thinking about the values of mindfulness, and I was thinking about concentration, and I was thinking about being able to see clearly, both introspectively and out in the world. And I was thinking about non-judgment, or some people say equanimity, which is this sense of not necessarily pushing or pulling and letting things be as they are. Around 2016, I started to recognize what I mentioned before, that, Carson, you said earlier that you can fabricate experience. I might disagree with that and say you can design for experience, but experience happens in the other. So you're choreographing. So if you take dancing as a metaphor, you're not moving someone's limbs for them. You're giving them the choreography and they're making it their own. And that's a beautiful interaction that I think we have as experienced designers and game designers. And so around 2016, I noticed that a lot of the problematic technologies around were intentionally choreographing some pretty nasty stuff, right? They're intentionally choreographing polarization. They were, secretly, had secret business models. You thought you were just using something, but they were selling ads that are making us feel insecure and isolated. They were promoting selfish individualism, inaction. There was a lot of manipulation. It's not great. And so to me, when I started to work on more and more technologies, and I work with these founders who are trying to push the envelope in various ways, I realized there's a lot of dimensions to think about what a compassionate technology looks like in context of society, which is why it's so important that Jim started this with mention about what's happening in the Gaza Strip, because you can't define a compassionate design or a compassionate product without thinking about the context. And so the context, when I think about where technology is as a society, I've kind of got 5 C's that I consider what we need to think about as a compassionate technology in 2023 today, based on where we are politically, based on where we are technology, right? The first is consensual, that we need not to have a hidden business model or a secret manipulative agenda, that we're asking for consent for the full experience of what's being provided, and we're getting that consent. The second is collectivist. There's nothing wrong with individual technologies, but the reality is most of them are that way. And so we need to see more technologies that generate deep connection, the stuff Jenova's working on, deep connections between people. That's a very important thing. The third is challenging. And what I mean by that is questioning our views and assumptions. because a lot of technology is designed to reinforce our existing beliefs and views, generating a lot of political polarization. So we need technologies that challenge us to think outside of our existing beliefs and views, and to think and have healthy, respectful dialogue with others and other ways of being. The fourth C is calm. Not that there's anything wrong with the fast technology, and some things have to be fast, but the reality is, again, most of it is super twitch, super aggressive, super accelerated, stressful, anxiety inducing. You got to answer the emails quickly, and you got to respond to Slack, and you got to play these games and kill everyone and blah, blah. So how do we calm it down? I think that's a compassionate thing to do as a designer today. And the fifth C is consequential, which is both in the internal introspective world of the user, but also in the actual real world. What are the short-term and long-term consequences of this technology? Is it just, hey, I had this cool experience and then I go on with my life? Or are there some positive consequences, either in the internal transformation of the user or player, or compassionate actions taken down the road? Sum total, Carson, the way I like to think about it now, and this is new for you, I know we've had some conversations about this, but I've been thinking about it, is like, we want to create products that are creating a net improvement of life experience. And that's not just human life, that's non-human life too. And so there's a lot of jargon in my field, like a user experience, and there's human-centered design, which ignores non-humans. And so like, I think we need to be moving to something like life experience, designing for life experience, not just when you're using my app, but what's your whole life experience like, and how's my app helping you there? And also life-centered design, which is like, you know, in Buddhist traditions, they like to talk about this phrase that I love, which is all beings. There's like two words that just capture all living beings. So how do we design for life, life-centered design? So those are some of the principles that are coming to mind as I start to do work on like a wide range of technologies in this space that are sort of universal across all the products and the services that are being designed and where they need to go.
That's brilliant. And just to wrap up, I want to add to your thought there, Jay, because to your point, we have been ideating together on this a lot. And I do believe that pointing to life experience is actually an antidote to the extractive modality of a human-centered relationship to the earth. So I think, to your point, like what Dharma teachers also bring and other wisdom traditions bring, is this intentional recognition of all life and being able to design for that. So I think that's just brilliant. Gosh, I wish we had another hour to do this. It's just, I feel like we're just getting started. Fortunately, you guys will be joining us at our Compassion 2.0 conference in the end of October. We will continue this discussion, talk about different modalities of design and so forth. So anyway, thank you both. Just tremendous. Such wisdom and genius within both of you, and your expression through professionally what you're doing. It's a treasure. So thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, because we have some other things to do.
Thank you, Carson. And just real quick, Jay and Jenova, before we transition, just a quick question for both of you. We haven't talked about artificial intelligence, and I'm curious to get your take on, you know, we all life on the planet is carbon, and we are creating this dynamic now where we're setting up this potential for oppositional force between carbon and silicon. And we have carbon sentient beings. We're bringing to life silicon sentient beings into the world. And I'd love to get your perspective on how do we ensure that we have compassion integrated into artificial intelligence as it's created and brought into life on the planet.
I know we're strapped for time, so I'll kind of try to do the short version of what would be another hour-long discussion on this topic. You got to open Pandora's box when we have 1 minute left. But I think there's been a lot of... So first of all, the new developments in AI are the tip of the spear for 20, 30, 40, even 50 years of work. And AI has been a long journey, and it just so happens that ChatGPT has come out and engage the imagination of the masses right now. But I've been following this stuff for a long time as a techie, and also, with a degree in neuroscience and psychology, even part of that was about AI. The reality is, I don't personally believe that the like fears of this turning into immediate artificial general intelligence, i.e., what you said, like bringing to life silicon beings, we're not really close to that at this point. What ChatGPT doing is like incredibly sophisticated data crunching. Humanity has spent 30 years building the most epic data set of all time, which we call the internet. And so the confluence of the internet and sophisticated computer models have created the ultimate search engine. But the idea that that's going to become a sort of conscious being, I mean, that's a philosophical discussion we can have, but the idea that that's somehow imminent because ChatGPT is a very useful data crunching neural net, those things don't compute for me. So I'm less concerned in the short term about a silicon being that we have to consider in this conversation. I think the biggest threat, and this is a whole other conversation, anyone who really understands what's going on with AI and what it really is should be worried a lot more about inequality than they should be worried about artificial general intelligence. And that to me is like my number one test when I'm talking to people about AI. If they can't understand that inequality is the real issue here, then it's a non-starter for me. We have to get that clear before we can talk about, because the AGI feels really distant and not really what ChatGPT is doing at this stage. And that's my view.
Yeah, thank you. How about you, Jenova?
Yeah, I've been trying to evaluate if any of these AI tools can help us to make better games. At this very moment, they are not, because they are, I mean, what AI is very good at is recognize patterns. I mean, this so-called general intelligence is not really a real intelligence. They read everything we write on the internet and they try to predict what are we going to say if the question is presented, right? So what they do is they're very good at capturing a very common or average voice that the internet has presented. But when it comes to art, when it comes to inspiration and entertainment, you know, how to say it? You have those cookie fortune, fortune telling cookies, right? You have those little sentences. That's very much, to me, is like what AI is good at, saying something that's always kind of true. You've heard very many times, like conventional wisdom or whatever. But in order to really excite someone and inspire someone, you almost have to go away from the common. And when we make an art that is truly impressive and I've never before seen, we needed the inspirational mind from the artists who have done many things and seen many things and try to make something new. But as of this very moment, the machine learning algorithm is not an innovative algorithm. It's more of a, whatever is popular algorithm. So like I never find the AI generated content being what I'm looking for. That's happened to be so far. The only thing that it helps me is when I need to reply an email and just a polite no email, and that seems to be pretty good. If it's very desensitized, polite rejection email, that's great. AI, you did it for what it's supposed to be.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. We're going to shift the conversation now. We've been focusing over the last hour or so, 45 minutes, on compassion in the design of products and architecting compassion into the human experience from a product perspective. We're not going to shift to a conversation on architecting the human experience in an organizational life. Unfortunately, Dr. Monica Worline wasn't able to be with us live today, so Carson and I had the opportunity to spend some time with her. We've got a pre-recorded conversation. So, Georg, if we could get you to share the video of that conversation, we're ready for it now.
1 second.
Well, Monica, thanks for being in conversation with Carson and myself about the area of focus in this Compassion 2.0 week. Today, we're focused on architected, compassionate human experiences, and we as individuals and collectively have lots of different experiences. Much of our waking time is in the workplace, so that would be an obvious place for us to focus. But certainly, for many people, they have, thankfully, a robust life outside of work as well. And so when we talk about human experiences, and be it in the workplace or otherwise, and I guess I'd like to have a bit of an intentional conversation around architecting those compassionate human experiences, and would very much welcome your thoughts. And thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be with you and to have this important conversation. I'm especially delighted that you've taken the word architecture and turned it into a verb, architecting. Along with my longtime co-author, Jane Dutton, wrote a book called Awakening Compassion at Work. And in that book, we use the metaphor of a social architecture of compassion for organizations. And we talk about architecting compassion in the way that you design systems, processes, and structures in an organization. That takes the idea of compassion from being a faddish or trendy to building it into the infrastructure of doing and being together so that it has lasting impact and it becomes a reliable way of getting the work done in the organization, whatever kind of organization we're working in. And so I know that many people think about the word culture and organizational cultures when they think about compassion, and building a more compassionate culture is a laudable and important goal. And we need it on a societal level to think about a broader national and global culture of compassion. And within organizations, to think about how cultures support compassion is important, because cultures are typically thought about in organizations as the fundamental assumptions we make about human nature and human being, right? Whether people are fundamentally capable and worthy of empathy and support, or whether the organization teaches us in its deep structure to think that people are lazy and have to be monitored, right? There's a long time debate around what culture is most productive. So anyway, tipping our culture toward the fundamental assumption that people are basically capable, that most people want to do their best and are trying hard, and that people are worthy of care and support. It's a long-term investment, and cultures are organic and don't change easily or predictably. So Jane and I, in our research, have investigated other flexible social structures that help organizations build compassion into their operating system. So we talk about routines as the primary way that organizations get things done. And the organizational productivity based on change in routines, that would be very well known to any listener who has thought about continuous improvement or quality assurance or things like this. What we talk about is taking that same approach, that rigorous approach to ensuring a quality product or service can be delivered, and looking at it through the lens of human connection, attention to suffering, and alleviating suffering. So that in every work routine, you think about how it could be done with greater compassion. So you might think, if you know cultures of lean, for instance, lean manufacturing, where we're trying to decrease error as we increase productivity. We've worked with people who talk about, can you do lean with heart? Right, where you ask the same questions about productivity and reliability and quality, but you introduce also human connection and care for one another as a fundamental need in the lean equation. We've worked with hospital systems around the shift change routine, with the moment where one group of people is going off work and another is coming on work. It's a place where we can introduce error into the system. So it's really important for patient safety. But it's also a really difficult moment in the lives of nurses or care providers. And if you can build into the shift change routine an expectation of compassion toward patient, oneself, and one's coworkers, it helps amplify safety and make the quality of working life better. So I'll stop giving an academic lecture now, Tom, and let you ask me the next question. But we do talk about 4 of these: culture, routines, roles, and networks, as building this architecture of compassion that's very different than treating it in a one-off way.
Yeah, maybe just it's a little bit of a diversion, because I want to come back to some of your points. But at least here in the U.S., when we look at how our country was founded, and the values, the principles, the beliefs, the puritanical beliefs about what does it mean to be human, that's informed. It's still very much a part of our society. It's still very much a part of our workplace, around how we hold people. I mean, our prison system is at the extreme, where somebody goes in to quote unquote do their time, and yet they're still punished after they've done their time. They're a convicted felon. They're no longer allowed to vote. A lot of their rights are taken away, their ability to seek employment, and that has creeped into our workplace. The other piece of history there is the time motion studies from 100 years ago in the manufacturing environment, clocking in. It in both instances, there's a story that we have about who are we as human beings that form the basis of many of our workplace cultures. And so historically, there hasn't been a lot of room for compassion. There hasn't been a lot of room for seeing the entire human being. So when someone like a Bob Chapman at Barry Weinmiller brings into their organization culture that each individual is somebody's precious child, and to be a leader, a manager in that organization, you have to see that individual through a different lens than how we as a culture nationally and historically, how employers have seen and viewed employees as nothing more than just a cog that's dispensable. And so I guess I'm wondering, with what you're finding in your research and you and your colleague have written about, where does that leave you?
Well, it leaves us right in the middle of a conundrum, doesn't it? Because on the one hand, what we know from important sociological research and from our own intuitions is that the availability of work and the ability to pursue meaningful work is a huge part of being able to live a good life. And it is a huge part of being able to live as a dignified human being, right? And when work disappears, there's something about the fundamental structure of dignity that disappears for people. And also work as a cultural product, right, in this culture is very much about a story of deservingness, right? And very much about the kind of work ethic that says that in a deep cultural assumption that nobody has to name because we all just take it for granted. People are intrinsically lazy unless we, have lots of rules to enforce their being here on time and doing what they're supposed to do. And that it's only by pushing ourselves really hard and punishing ourselves enough that we could accomplish what we need to accomplish, and that certain kinds of people deserve the opportunity for that, and other kinds of people have lost the deservingness for that. And so they're, as you say, I think when I think of this part of compassion and culture, I think of that in the definition of compassion as a social process. One of the important parts of the process is interpretation, right? This is what we're pointing to here, that culture gives us, right, unconsciously grounds for interpreting who is worthy of our compassion, right? Who is worthy of work, right? Who deserves a chance? Who deserves a second chance? Right? And those kinds of questions, I think, come right up to the surface when we open the door of the contemporary workplace, and we want to have humanistic values living alongside the insatiable demands for productivity, right? All grounded and nested in a very unique kind of developed Protestant work ethic. And we're all dancing together.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of pieces in what you were just describing. So one is, as we've heard earlier in the week on in the conversations around the VUCA world that we're living in demands compassion. It's the only way through for us as a species. And so there's that piece of it that's very much alive in what you're sharing. And the other piece of it is really around with the externalities, whether it's Wall Street or other pressures, we have created this economic system that the only metric is growth. And in that growth, then it's about productivity, it's about getting the most out of the workforce, it's about how much money's falling to the bottom line, which it's insanity. I mean, it will get us ultimately to an end that none of us are looking for. And so, thinking about compassion as the solution, how does that get integrated into that economic model that we have, that economic system, and creating the kinds of workplaces that are human-centric?
Well, that's another reason why I really appreciate choosing the idea of architecting, because I don't have the hubris to think that I can answer the question you just asked. It's such a big question. But what I do have a lot of hope and belief in is that if we create intentional architects of compassion sitting wherever they sit in all kinds of organizations, and we do everything we can do to legitimate and support and educate and enable those architects of compassion, that people, whether they're sitting in the receptionist's chair, right, or in the boardroom, right, or in management, or whether they're activists working on shaking up the foundations of the organization and getting new attention, that every one of those roles can be done with the lens of bringing more compassion to the world, right? And weaving compassion into the work. And so, one thing that I think will help us rearrange the fundamentals of the workplace and question and revisit fundamental assumptions about the social good and what's financially and socially viable is if everyone starts to think, right, what if my job, first and foremost, before anything else on my set of responsibilities, is to awaken compassion? And that gets you to a place where the CEOs are talking about treating everyone as precious, right? And it gets you to a place where, in some of my, where we see from people who clean the environments and care for the environments that we live in, up to the doctors who are performing the surgeries and the nurses who are giving the skilled care, are all thinking about how could we take better care of one another so that we have a healthier population around us. And that architecting every role in society as if compassion was our first responsibility, right, plants a seed of fundamental transformation.
What's alive for you there, Carson, in this discussion?
I appreciate that. Thanks, Tom. There's so many different things. I really liked, Monica, what you were speaking to, and Tom too, of course, around the Protestant notion of work and deserving. There's this notion of judgment inherent in all of that, in that sense of who deserves this kind of work, combined with kind of an industrial modality of assembly line thinking about how humans pop into the creation of value. I mean, some of these things just feel they're, of course, very present in today's world. And at the same time, it feels so antiquated in terms of moving forward. It just doesn't feel right. And it also is interesting to me, too, to be thinking about what some of the younger generations, Gen Z and millennials in particular, they're demanding a very different work frame for them. And COVID, of course, really exacerbated that. So I'm curious about that tension and what that looks like moving forward and how that plays out as the demand coming onto these pre-existing systems is going to force change. So I think that's one thing that comes to mind. And then the other thing that comes to mind too is thinking about Monica speaking to, I love this idea about if everybody's first my words, not yours, first responsibility in their professional orientation, regardless of what it is to be compassionate or have a compassionate frame and a way to execute. Wow, that's amazing. And then yet at the same time, for those listeners who aren't quite familiar, there is a growing body of evidence that compassionate and flourishing work environments have bottom line beneficial impact to the organizations. So this isn't a sense of, wouldn't it be nice? This is hard-nosed business at some level, if you want to look at it that way. I don't want to commoditize compassion, and I don't want to, we were talking about this earlier, I don't want to turn it into a HR du jour practice in the sense of it's a fad, because it's not. But you look at Google Aristotle Project or projects like that, and or some of the work that Monica and Jane have done. I mean, there are real world business implications about psychological safety in a workplace where people feel safe and they take risks, and that only benefits the organization overall. So anyway, these are just a couple of different comments that I just wanted to share with both of you and also with our listeners.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate the extent to which built into our fundamental thinking about business and business organizations is a trade-off mentality, right? Like, we can either be nice or get good results. We can, be be humane or we can be profitable. And even to challenge, right, that those, rather than seeing those as a trade-off, right, that to realize the full fundamental human capability of an organization requires that we understand that humans suffer, that we're fragile, that we are easily threatened, right? And that we need safety, we need care, we need to know that others are concerned for our well-being. We need to feel seen and heard and understood. We want to be treated as unique individuals, even while we belong to something greater than ourselves, right? And these things, right, when we meet these challenges of the human condition, actually unlock our capacity to do tremendous things together. But it is not an easy path to walk, right? That as a leader in a time-pressured, overwhelming, short-term business culture, it's a lot easier to think, do what I say or get out of here. And so that the trade-off is still so fundamental to how we unconsciously think about business, right? And that the evidence shows that the opposite is so true, right? They're just both, I think, alive and pointing Tom back to those fundamental challenges about what business is to us, right? And what thriving human enterprise offers us as a human species, and how it's colored by all the same difficulties and challenges that come along with human cultures.
Yeah, it's just picking up on something you shared, Carson. When I look at the nature of the workforce today, we've got, and there's been lots of research on the multiple generations in the workforce. The traditional, and it's a slippery slope, but the quote unquote traditional employment contract between the employer and the employee in the past century was a commitment to cradle to grave. And then it went from that traditional to very much a transactional employment relationship contract, both explicit in some cases and implicit in others. We've got the Gen Zs who are coming into a work environment now where they're not getting the development, they're not getting the training, they're not getting the fundamentals of what they need that's being expected, demanded from the employer. They have their own perspective on what is the nature of work, why are they working, what do they expect and want, and it creates a very messy situation. And then to try and attempt to throw compassion into that mix, I think is probably overwhelming for most employers to take that on. I don't know what you're saying, Monica, in the conversations you're having with organizations, and how can they initiate those conversations? How can they think through this?
Yeah, I think it is overwhelming. And if we kind of bring the broad cultural and social conversation down back to the human scale, many times when I talk with leaders or managers or supervisors and their employees, there's that very recognizable sense when I hear someone that I work with or someone who I'm accountable to and they feel accountable to me is going through a terrible life situation. I want to be able to take the pain away, or I want to be able to fix it somehow. I want to be able to do more, right? And if I can't, I feel like I can't, right, then I feel, as the person called to act with compassion in that situation, like I can't do enough. And what we know from our research is that in work contexts, most people who are trying to act with compassion want to be able to do more. And if they feel like they can't do more, they may stop doing anything. While most people who receive compassion in the work context are looking for seemingly small things like more flexibility or recognition that they're going through something difficult, not for tremendous material goods or for someone to solve the problem for them. And so they're just really kind of basic human interactions with suffering that can shut us down or make us feel like our response is inadequate, that happen every day in work environments. And as people in leadership positions who have the capacity to influence broad scale policies, right, get overwhelmed with the suffering that they see, right, and their inaction can prevent entire systems from adopting more flexible policies or things that might affect people at a very broad scale. So I think we do have to pay attention to the overwhelmingness of the suffering and to the fact that in the end, for most forms of human suffering, we can't fix it. There is no solution. There is simply not turning away and not giving up on being with those who are suffering, right? And our presence and our granting people room to be human makes a tremendous difference.
Yeah, when I've talked to clients I've worked with over the decades, I've attempted to have them take a very large step back and talk about the totality of the work experience. And through that lens, look at what is it that the employer can actually offer to the employee around learning and development, around the nature of the relationship they have with their colleagues, around the nature of the work, their ability to grow and advance, compensation, direct pay, etc., are pieces of it, but many organizations don't have the luxury to take that big step back and look at the totality of the work experience, where these conversations around culture, compassion, it's more of a, the three of us have talked about this before. It's more of a fad, a trend. It's what are the other employers in my industry doing in the labor markets where I'm competing? What are the offerings du jour that I have to put on the employee website or make available to them, and not getting to that, the real heart of the matter about what's the nature of work and what can an employer offer their workforce.
And also to add to that too, if I may, we were talking about this earlier as well, if they do have the wherewithal to start to frame themselves as a compassionate company and or to create a compassionate environment, how do they stay with that when times get bad, right? How do they make that commitment and not commoditize compassion as some sort of employee carrot, if you will, or candidate carrot to come work for the company, but then abandon the principles, when times quote unquote get tough or they feel like they need to toss things overboard, so how is it baked at those deep core roots?
Any thoughts on that, Monica?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Monica.
I do think that's where this idea that if we have thought about how we do what we do, right, in the deep structure of delivering a great service or running a great hotel or being a great healthcare company or running a great, public health system, that woven into how we accomplish the excellence that we're seeking to accomplish is concern for one another, attention to the quality of human connection, and the flexibility to accommodate the flow of life, right, as it passes through the flow of work. Then really when the organization goes through a shock or when something broader happens that the organization has to adapt to, right there built into the how we do our core work is compassion. It's not a disposable add-on kind of thing. And that to me, that's the promise of the idea of architecting, and more people in organizations thinking like designers of compassion, so that it's woven into the very nature of work itself.
Can you speak to any examples of employers where you've experienced that, where they've actually created those conditions?
Sure.
Just to bring it home to the audience.
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned before, I'll go into a little bit more depth when we talk about work, like breaking down one routine and weaving in more compassion. The idea, whether you're a manufacturing organization or a healthcare organization, that you have people coming and going, and it's when people come and go, in like the seams of that are where error gets introduced and also where stress gets created often. So by helping people pause regularly, maybe once a quarter, twice a year, and say, how could we do the shift change with more compassion? And what's one way you personally could feel more compassion as you're engaging in it this quarter? It's a relatively simple, low-cost intervention that focuses on a specific routine in the organization and weaves it into being a part of the daily work. We could look at other task-based routines in that same way, and I've seen organizations do that a lot. Like, we have this particular banking transaction, or we have this particular transportation routine. How could we tweak it so that we're paying more attention to human distress and responding to human distress as we do it? And then there's, how do we get people into the system and socialize them? And how do people leave the system, and how do we say goodbye? And those are relatively universal moments every organization has, where people need to come in and be socialized and people will exit. And those are also key moments for weaving compassion into the very nature of the work. So thinking with greater care about hiring or selection routines and having more people involved, building higher quality human connections as people find their way in and come to understand what membership means, doing more human to human welcoming work, and then paying attention to who's leaving and not making it mysterious or shameful, right? Having more ways to say goodbye to people, or acknowledge the good work that people have done, to acknowledge the grief that we feel as we lose people or say goodbye to relationships that matter. That also weaves compassion into the very heart of the work and the flow of the workplace.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm just checking the time and realizing we're bumping up against our time together. I'm just curious, Carson or Monica, if you have any closing thoughts to this part of our conversation this week on compassion.
Go ahead, Monica.
Well, I'm not sure I've been a great conversation partner today, because I've probably been sort of big and abstract. But the conversation has been very compelling to me. I'm very grateful for being part of it. And the idea of thinking big and thinking intentional design and architecting work, right? That in the nature and fabric of the tasks I do every day, compassion could become real to me, and it could become a part of everything that I think my work is about. Right? I think that there is a way that knowing that that can happen, whether you're, an attorney or a security guard or a professor, right? Like whatever, a podcast host, an entrepreneur, right? Like whatever role you have, and whatever work you care about, that you're the one who knows how to architect compassion into it. And that as you do that, you unlock the potential for other people to see and learn from that model. I mean, that to me has transformational power, and I'm very passionate about it. So I'm sorry if I haven't been very articulate about it today, but maybe the passion comes through.
Well, both have come through, and we're immensely grateful to have you as contributing to the conversation this week. It's a huge topic, and there's a lot there, and we've done you a disservice of only limiting this piece of the conversation to such a brief part of the week. But grateful you've been with us this week.
Let's not wait for the leader, for the mythical leader, for someone who's going to tell us how to do it. I think that the power of architecting it is that we're the architects, right? And we can do the work of architecting our own context right now with the inspiration from listening to a conversation like this.
Oh, thank you. Any closing thoughts, Carson, or questions?
No, I just appreciate Monica and her work. I mean, she's been doing this for years. She's really, truly, she and Jane have been way out in front of everybody. I thought the conversation was great. And I think the thing that I continue to take away is that we are not talking about some Band-Aid. We're not talking about some additive thing. We're talking about a transformational frame that comes, like Monica keeps speaking to, around an architecture that starts at the very root of how we are human together. And in this case, how we co-create value together in an organization, be it as an academic, a podcast host, an entrepreneur, or a doctor or a nurse, or someone who is taking care to clean a facility. It doesn't matter. And I think that's the thing that's really shown through for me today in today's conversation with Monica. So thank you for that. And Tom, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you both.
Hi, Tom, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh,
Thanks for coming back, Jim. Carson, Jenova, come back for our closing comments, and thank you, Georg, for the support with the video. So we've covered a lot of ground today with the intentional architecting of human experience with both products and organizations. And so just welcome you back to the conversation today, Jim. Any questions or closing thoughts you have for Jenova? And unfortunately, we lost Jay. And
yeah, well, it's been a marvelous conversation once again. So thank both of you, Tom and Carson, for bringing such an extraordinary group of people. And Jenova, I wanted to get your comment on the conversation that they just had, because it seems to me that there's some real similarities between what you're doing and what she's doing. Because it's in some ways random acts of kindness in the small. What the I Ching calls the preponderance of the small. It's just a video game. We're just architecting, a more humane and living or working environment. And I know for me, for example, I just moved to Washington, D.C., and I just moved into this apartment building. And when I walked in, carrying my luggage, and I'd been schlepping, from the other place and all of that, the man at the desk smiled and said, "Welcome." And that small little act of kindness really brightened my day. It was so unexpected, in our isolated, alienated, culture, for someone to do something very human had a real effect on me, and we became friends. I, smiled back, and then I searched him out each day, and turns out he's Ethiopian, and we're going to go out for coffee, and he's going to tell me the story of Ethiopia and all of that. So that's an example, I think, of what was being discussed. And your video games also, they're profound, but they're small. They're not trying to create world peace, right? Or peace in the Middle East. They're just trying to entertain, for a few minutes, but in a way that inculcates the higher virtue. So I just would love to have your comment on that.
Yeah, I would say, okay, so number one, it's small, right? The sense of small ties to what I was saying earlier. When you feel small, you feel vulnerable. When you feel vulnerable, you want to cooperate and help each other. And the second part about randomness, it's very easy for an organization to want to do something like, okay, every year we're going to do this, every year we're going to give you a free iPod Air, and the first time you do it, everybody's really happy, right? The second time, there was no human thoughts put behind this. It's just an automation, repeat, right? So really, the randomness it doesn't mean someone was throwing a dice. The randomness means this is a genuine act rather than something on repeat. There's a human behind it that made this effort. So genuine, connection where vulnerability is allowed, that is creating a compassionate, environment within the organization. I also very much agree with the architecting. I'm an experienced designer. I'm also a CEO. So every time we work on these organizational process, right? Or how is the bonus being decided? How do we arrange our offsite? What type of gift do we give to the employees? Like, can we make an exception for somebody's visa application? And I've brought to many of the puzzling choices, just like what you guys discussed. And I often find that, when I don't know what to do, I say just keep it personal. Keep it personal between the manager and the employee. Don't generalize it. Just make it exception, make it personal.
That's such an important point, to keep things personal rather than institutional and policy formed. because that is what makes it real and authentic, in people's lives. So that's a very, very good point. Very, very good point. Carson, do you want to make some concluding remarks? Then you, Tom, and then tee us up for tomorrow.
Sure. I think my concluding remarks are just, again, looking at the brilliance again of architecture and experience design, and to our earlier conversation with Jenova, just for me, my own epiphany on this kind of where technology has come into experience creation, or I should say not creation, but framing, to Jay's point that, people have the experience, but as architects, you can just try to create the scene, so to speak, and the frame for them to hopefully have a good experience. I just think it's an incredible opportunity and time that we're seeing now in our world, to be able to really lean into this pro-social nature that we have, and to be able to, with intention, move forward and really try to scale that through compassionate architecture. So Genova's done that with 18 million people happening monthly. It's just a phenomenal achievement. Anyway, just in grace and in awe. So not much else to say.
Yeah, 18 million people, Jenova, is no mean accomplishment. So well done. Congratulations. Truly.
Thank you. It's not our flowers and roses. 18 million people is like a small nation. You do your good, but there's always weeds that grow in the garden, and every day you gotta go pluck the weed to keep it
Totally.
positive.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Tom.
Yeah, thank you for being with us, Jenova. In their absence, thank you, Jay. Thank you, Monica, for being with us today. Carson, another terrific collaboration. Thanks for the opportunity to bring this together, and excited about tomorrow's conversation. We're going to be probably overly ambitious again in what we're trying to cover in the landscape, but we want to be talking about compassion, capitalism, and the Sustainable Development Goals within the United Nations, and highlight. Fortunately, there are some amazing capitalists out there who care about compassion, that are making sure that capitalism incorporates compassion, and with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, making sure that compassion is a component of that, and we're seeing that with the interdevelopment goals as part of the SDGs. So another terrific lineup tomorrow, and excited to continue this conversation on Compassion 2.0. And thanks, Jim, for making it all happen.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad to be part of this.
Yeah, and again, beautiful backdrop. Jenova, beautiful game, beautiful game. And thank you too, Carson. Well, that'll bring us to a close for today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat, and we'll see you all then again tomorrow for the final session of our 5-day program on Compassion 2.0. Given what's happening in the world, there's no issue more urgently compelling for humanity than how we upgrade our capacity for compassion. Thank you all. Bye for now.